We are on the book of Genesis. This is lesson number 2, and the title of the lesson is God elects Abraham for the offspring to come through. So people may ask the question, why did God choose Abraham? And here's a basic reason or overall idea of why God chose him: for the offspring that he promised to come through. And we're covering chapters 12 through to 19. And the objective of this lesson is that God remembers his promise of the offspring. So we ought not to forget that God made a promise and he sticks to his promise. And the subject here is that God reveals his plan to bless the world. And that's important for us to understand, especially in the book of Genesis. And we have to understand that the nation of Israel never existed in the book of Genesis. They were non-existent in Genesis. They only come into existence in the book of Exodus. And here was God making a promise to Abraham that his plan was to bless the world. To bless the world. And the key text that I'm using is Genesis chapter 17 and verses 3 to 5. Abraham fell down, face down, and God said to him, "As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be a father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations." And we can see from that straight away that God is not a God of favoritism. So as we've already seen, the Bible starts with God as creator. And that's the way God presents himself in the Bible. He presented himself in many ways, but the first one is he presented himself as creator. We should get to know the Bible first, or get to know what God is like first as creator. We ought to start with that. Creation did not always exist, but God always existed. He always existed. Before he created, he was God. And this means that whatever God created, he created for himself. Because nothing existed. So whatever he created for himself. Just like if we make something, we make it for ourselves and we are happy about what we make, we admire it, we make it for ourselves, for our own purpose and our own satisfaction. So when God created, he created for his purpose and his pleasure. All things that he created was for that purpose. And God created mankind to have fellowship with God. Think about that question. Why did God create humans? And there's the one overall answer is to have fellowship with him. But man created a selfish spot in his heart and broke his relationship with God. So his fellowship ended. But God knew that this was going to happen, so he already had a plan to mend that relationship. Man does not have the ability to mend the relationship with God because he's fallen and he's spiritually dead. How would he do that? But with God being kind-hearted, he revealed his plan to reconcile man back to himself. His plan was to destroy the work of the adversary through the birth of a child. But this was no ordinary child. He is the child of the promise of God. That was God starting to reveal his plan for reconciling man back to himself. He will come and do the work to destroy the work of the adversary. And that is what God promised. It's a promise of God. When was the child going to come is the question. And people are living at that time would be asking that. When was the child going to come? It's a fair question. We know that for now that the child had not come during the time period of Genesis, during that time in history. Yet at that time, people began to believe in that promise. That's all they knew was a promise that God had given. And they began to believe the promise of God. But how do we know that they began to believe? There's some actions that they had that we could see. That's recorded for us in Genesis 4:26. Men began to call on the name of the Lord. Genesis 4:26. Enoch walked with God. Genesis 5:24. And we've learned that even Noah walked with God, and that's Genesis 6:9. But just having faith, just this little faith, just of these people believing in that promise, was starting to mend that broken relationship with God. They just started to believe in the promise. But not everyone wanted to believe God's promise. Many preferred the broken relationship. So they lived as if God did not exist. These people were called godless or evil. They acted as if God never existed, something that they wanted. However, God knew that some would reject him. But to give those godless people a kind of sanity, those people that rejected God, to give them some kind of sanity, God graciously gave them a conscience. Conscience is the only thing that gave godless men a sense of morality to know right from wrong. So those who are godless can still know right from wrong. And this in itself was a witness to evil men that their attitudes and actions were evil. So we know that conscience is a witness that God exists, but it's also a witness to godless people that the actions that they are performing are evil. They knew it because conscience told them that. Evil is an attitude that opposes God, while good is an attitude that submits to God. So more than just doing bad things, that's evil, it's an attitude that rejects God. That is foundationally evil. But ultimately, without God, life has no purpose. Therefore, God is grieved when men reject him. God is sad about people rejecting him. They won't exist, and God's not happy about it. God does not want people to be born, live aimlessly, and then die. It's not something that God wants. Therefore, he reveals himself to all mankind to give them the opportunity to turn to him. That's why God has revealed himself. He's gracious, he's merciful. And we've looked at Romans chapter 10 and verses 14 and 15. How then can they call on the one they have not believed? How can they believe in the one whom they have not heard? We can't come up with an idea of God. Someone has to tell us. And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can they preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. God has to reveal himself for anyone to know him. The children of Adam are born separated from God. They are born with no concept that God actually exists. But God graciously revealed himself because he wants men to turn to him. That's merciful of God. Remember, Adam separated himself from God. Therefore, all his children are born alienated from God. And only as God reveals himself to them will they know that he exists. Otherwise, we wouldn't know. So let's look at Genesis chapter 12. God calls Abraham. When God called Abraham, he took the first step to starting a relationship with him. In verse 1, the Lord said to Abraham, or Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. So here's God calling Abraham. The Lord told him to leave his country, leave his people, and leave his household, his father's household. There's a leaving there. God made him a promise to make him into a great nation, and that through him all the peoples of the earth will be blessed. All peoples of the earth will be blessed. Verses 2 and 3. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So Abraham left his father's households. He left his people, the country, according to the Lord's commandment. But he took along with him his nephew. He traveled from the Ur of the Chaldees, or the Chaldeans, to a place called Haran, where his father died. So if you look at the map, we will see that Haran, in modern day, it sort of borders Syria and Turkey. But it seems to be more Turkey side of the border. He then left Aaron and went to the land of Canaan as the Lord told him. When he arrived in Canaan, the Lord promised to give him that land. So when Abraham put his foot on the land of Canaan, God said, I'm going to give you this land. And in response, Abraham built an altar to the Lord at a place called Shechem. And that's the first place of his arrival. Verse 7. The Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who appeared to him. Abraham built an altar at Shechem. Then he traveled to the east side of Bethel, and he built another altar to the Lord. In verse 8 tells us, from there he went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent. With Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, there he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. And because of a severe famine in Canaan, Abraham went to Egypt, where he lied about his wife, Sarah. So Pharaoh decided to take Sarah as his wife. She was a beautiful woman, and Pharaoh took her to be his wife. But God inflicted diseases on Pharaoh and his household. So Pharaoh returned Sarah and sent them on their way. I'm not going to tell you the whole story in details. I trust that you've read all the chapters, you know all the details, you know the story. So what I'm doing is to take you through a biblical or theological concept of the message of the Bible. But we can discuss the details during our discussion time. So let's look at chapter 13. Abraham and his nephew separate. From Egypt, Abraham went back to the land of Canaan and back to Bethel, where he called on the name of the Lord. So after leaving Egypt, back to Canaan, verse 4 tells us, and where he at first built an altar, there Abram called on the name of the Lord. So he's back in Canaan. Now Abraham and Lot were quite wealthy, and the land was not big enough for them. So quarrels started between Abraham's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen. So to keep the peace, Abraham chose to part ways with his nephew. He gave Lot the first choice of land, and Lot chose the best that his eyes could see. Abraham said to Lot, you choose first. And Abraham and Lot chose the best. After Lot had settled near Sodom, God told Abraham that he was going to give him and his offspring, who we know to be the Israelites. But of course the Israelites were non-existent at that time. And God told Abraham that he's going to give that whole land of Canaan to them forever. Verse 15. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring. And that was God's promise to him. Chapter 14. Profitable but sinful. Although the pasture land that Lot chose was excellent, Lot's eyes could see this beautiful pasture land excellent for grazing his herds. The land was excellent, and he chose that. But the men of that region were sinners in the sight of the Lord. So he didn't quite consider that, though. Chapter 13 and verse 10, we'll also look at verse 13. Verse 10 says, Lot looked up and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, towards Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. It was a beautiful land. But let's look at verse 13. Now the men of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. So Lot chose what was economically profitable, but did not consider the people of that land were godless. So kings from the north and from Babylon had defeated and subdued the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. So it will be south to them. And other surrounding kings. They just looted everything. They looted those cities, and then they left. They took the people, the cattle, the possessions. They took everything. They also took Lot as well. So they captured Lot When Abraham heard about this, he decided to go and rescue his nephew. So some Canaanites joined forces with him, and at night they attacked and defeated the northern kings and brought back his nephew with his family and his possessions. And when he returned, he gave a tenth. When Abraham had returned from all his battles, he gave a tenth of the plunder to Melchizedek. Melchizedek was the king of Salem, a priest of God. Here was a Canaanite who was a priest of God, a Canaanite, a priest of God Most High, and he pronounced God's blessing on Abraham, as we see in verses 19 and 20. And he blessed Abram, saying, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth." So here was a Canaanite king that believed in God the Creator, creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. Of course, Abraham gave him a tenth of all the spoils, of all the plunder that he took from battle. He didn't give him a tenth of any of his own personal possessions. Some people feel only Abraham and the Israelites knew God. Just something that we need to think about. That's not quite true. People from other nations knew the true God. As we've seen, Melchizedek was a Canaanite king. He knew the true God. And people have worshipped the true God. Remember, Israelites were non-existent at this time in history. In the book of Genesis, no Israelites. These people worshipped God. They knew the true God. And many were even priests of the true God. At that time in history, God had faithful people from other nations as well. Actually, Abraham was submitting to a Canaanite person who was faithful to God. And that's important for us to understand as we read through the book of Genesis. These facts are there. So chapter 15, righteousness from God. God told Abram in this chapter that he is his protector and provider. Chapter 15 and verse 1. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." Then Abraham responds by calling God sovereign. Abraham recognizes God as sovereign, meaning that God does whatever he wants to without any outside influence. That's what sovereign means. Verse 2 says, But Abram said, "O sovereign Lord, what can you give me, since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eleazar of Damascus?" He didn't think that he would have a son to inherit his estate, a servant in his household. Eleazar of Damascus will inherit everything. Sovereign means that God needs nothing outside of himself in order to exist. He needs nothing outside of himself. If he needs nothing outside of himself, then he cannot be controlled by anything outside of himself. Nothing outside of God can control God. If that was the case, then he won't be sovereign. If God needed Abraham, then God would not be sovereign. There is a difference between need and a want. A need is something that you cannot live without. Like we cannot live without oxygen. You cannot live without water. A want is something that you can live without. Just to give us an idea, Abraham needs God. So basically, we need God for our existence. Without God, we cannot exist. And that's human need. And that means that we are not sovereign, because we need something outside of ourselves in order to exist. Oxygen, water. But we need God to exist. We are not self-existent. We depend on God, but He does not depend on us. Remember, he was fully God before He created anything. He was fully God. So we can't go around preaching to people and say, God needs you. No, he doesn't. Before we existed, he was fully God. Sovereign also gives us the idea of being uninfluenced. Abraham did not influence God to bless him. Let's take a look at Joshua chapter 24, verses 2 and 3. And we can see when God chose Abraham, it wasn't that God saw Abraham and, oh, yeah, he was a good person, he was seeking God and all that. That wasn't the case. Abraham was worshipping idols when God called him. So Joshua 24, 3 and 4 says, Joshua said to all the people, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says. Long ago your forefathers, and one of their forefathers will be Abraham. Of course, their main forefather is Abraham. Including Terah, the father of Abraham, and Nahor, lived beyond the river and worshipped what? Other gods. But I took your father Abraham from the land beyond the river and led him throughout Canaan and gave him many descendants. I gave him Isaac. And that's what God says. So Abraham didn't do anything to influence God to bless him. He didn't. God is sovereign. No one influenced God to bless all the nations of the world. God was being merciful. God was being gracious. God was being patient. God was being kind-hearted. That's why he's blessing the world. That's why he called Abraham. And so God's promise to Abraham was not controlled by Abraham, but purely what God wanted to do for him. There was no manipulation, by the way. And all Abraham needed to do was to just believe what God promised him. He just needed to believe. God said, I'm going to give you a son. You don't try to make that work. If I promised it, I will give you a son. That's all Abraham needs to just believe. And when Abraham realized that there is nothing that he can do to gain God's favor, he was starting to understand God. That was a beginning point when he started to understand God. All God required of him was to believe who God is and what God can do. When Abraham understood that, he was right where God wanted him to be. And so that's where God wants us to be. So just believe that God is and what he can do. And when Abraham believed, that is what God credited to him as righteousness. Genesis chapter 15 and verses 5 and 6. He took him outside and said, look up at the heavens and count the stars. You know why God did that? Abraham, I want to teach you a lesson. It's not about what you can do. It's about what I can do. Now come outside of your tent one night, count the stars, if you can. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Abraham, does it say? Abraham believed God. He couldn't make this to happen. So Abraham believed God, and he credited to him as righteousness. We will learn a lot more about believing and having faith as we progress through the scriptures. The reason God asked Abraham to count the stars was to show him that it's about what God can do and not about the doings of man. God is saying to Abraham, I not only can count the stars, I made every one of them. But they're so numerous you can't even count them. And what God is graciously doing for Abraham is what Abraham could not do for himself. Abraham's righteousness did not come from his abilities and his actions, but from simply believing in God. I believe that you are and what you can do. And that's when God credited righteousness to him. From the time he left Ur of the Chaldeans, he did not have righteousness. Starting from Genesis chapter 12, when God called him. He was only given righteousness about 10 to 15 years later. So up until that point, he thought that his actions were bringing him the rewards. When you get to Genesis chapter 15, from chapter 12, it was a period of about 10 to 15 years later. Abraham had traveled to Haran, from there to Canaan, to Egypt, back to Canaan. All that time he didn't have righteousness. Nothing. So about 10 to 15 years later, just these few chapters, 12, 13, 14, and 15, only in 15 we are told that God credits him with righteousness. Before that, Abraham thought that it was his actions, obeying the Lord, following him, doing what God wanted him to do. He thought he was going to get rewards. But God was bringing him to a point of, I just want you to believe who I am, and when I say something, I will do it, and I'm capable of doing that. So up until that time, he thought that his actions were bringing him the rewards. Therefore, God was teaching him faith. Teaching him, you just need to believe. Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. And Abraham was too old. So it was humanly impossible for this couple to have a child coming from them. They were too old. But what was humanly impossible, just like Abraham couldn't count the stars, what was humanly impossible, God said that he was going to make possible for them. And that is the God of the Bible. He created light on the first day, and on the fourth day he created the source for that light. He's God. There is nothing impossible for God. Right at the beginning of creation, people could see that. What God can do, man cannot do. That's why we need to believe who he is. Just believe. We can't do something and hold God accountable to reward us. He rewards us when we believe who he is and what he does. And that's why he reveals himself to us. God is gracious in revealing himself to us. He wants mankind to know him by learning about him. Learn about me. Get to know me. That's how you will know me. He promised Abraham and Sarah a son when it was impossible to have one. They were old. And after Abraham believed God and God credited him with righteousness, God made a covenant with him. After Abraham prepared the animals on the ground, God caused him to fall into a deep sleep. Then God came down, walked through the animals himself, woke Abraham up and told him that he had made the covenant with Abraham, according to verse 18. Normally two people will walk through the animals and the covenant is made, the contract is made. But God caused a deep sleep to fall on Abraham. He came down, he walked through the animals himself. Verse 18 tells us that he made the covenant with Abraham. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham and said, and it wasn't the other way around. Abraham didn't make the covenant with God. God made the covenant with Abraham. To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates. God tells Abraham that he will give the land of the Canaanites to his descendants. The Canaanites, of course, were rebellious sinners against the Lord. They sacrificed their children to their gods, little children. But they were godless. God had been patient with them for many years, yet they refused to acknowledge God. God's patience does not last forever. But his patience does create the opportunity for men to repent. That's what his patience does. However, in about 400 years from Abraham's time, his family will be a nation and will occupy the promised land. Let's take a look at chapter 16. Very interesting topic on this chapter. The angel of the Lord. Sarah decides to make it easy for God. Here was humans trying to bring their actions into what God promises. Sarah tries to make it easy for God by acquiring a child from her maidservant Hagar. Verse 2 of chapter 16. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I will build a family through her. Abraham agreed to what Sarah had said. So Abraham also came up with a human solution to try and make God's plan work. Because God said that you're going to get many descendants. So he told God that a servant in his household will be the heir. Chapter 15 and verse 3 says, "And Abraham said, You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." And Abraham and Sarah's plans, of course, we know never worked. Then Sarah fought with her husband. Okay, they made these plans, and now she fought with her husband because of his child with Hagar, the Egyptian woman. And because she treated Hagar harshly, Hagar ran away into the desert. But in the desert she found a spring of water. And there she was confronted by the angel of the Lord. Verses 7 and 8 of chapter 16. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was a spring that is beside the road of Shur. And he said, Hagar, servant of Sarah, where have you come from and where are you going? I am running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. Question is, who is the angel of the Lord? He asks us some questions about where she's coming from and where she is going. And Hagar answers the angel of the Lord like she's talking to a human person. Just casual talk. She was not startled when she saw him. And that's why I tried to find a picture of the angel of the Lord without wings. Because a lot of people have put a picture of this story, but with wings. If he did have wings, then she would have been startled. But as the angel of the Lord continued to speak to her, his words made her realize who he was by just him speaking to her. Let's take a look at some verses here. Genesis 16 verses 9 through to 12. Then the angel of the Lord told her, Go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, You are now with child. You will have a son. You shall name him Ishmael. For the Lord has heard your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He will live in hostility towards all his brothers. He speaks in the first person. When you say, I did this, or I, me, that's speaking in the first person. But when you speak with these kind of phrases, you have done this, then that's speaking in the second person. But when you say they or them, that's speaking in the third person. But the angel of the Lord speaks in the first person. I will so increase your descendants. That's speaking in the first person. I will. So that's interesting. No prophet could speak like that, and no angel that appeared. Angel Gabriel, we can think of, Angel Michael. They never speak in the first person like this. Or no other angel that appeared to any human that spoke would speak in the first person like the angel of the Lord. But let's look at the way Hagar responded. She said, You are the God who sees me. Genesis 16:13. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have seen the one who sees me. So here's reference to the angel of the Lord being God. So she named that place Beer Lahai Roi, the well of the living one who sees me. That's what that means. This is the first mention of the angel of the Lord in the Bible, and we are told that he is God appearing in human form. We will learn more about the angel of the Lord as we progress through the books of the Bible. So, a long way to still go. This is just the start of some of the things that we could learn about the angel of the Lord. Hagar went back to Sarah and gave birth to a son, whom Abraham named Ishmael. Ishmael means God hears. Let's take a look at chapter 17, the sign of the covenant. Abraham was 75 when he left Haran. He was 86 when Ishmael was born. So pretty old age here. Now he was 99 years old when God confirmed the covenant with a sign. Abraham knew God as creator. And that's the first way he knew God. Then God revealed himself as sovereign, meaning he is God who is not controlled by anyone or anything. And now God revealed himself to Abraham as Lord Almighty, which is El Shaddai in the Hebrew. So there's a progress over the way God reveals himself to mankind. And we should see that. We can't just jump around the Bible here and back and forth and anywhere. We should see the way God progressively revealed himself to mankind. And as the Almighty, God was making Abraham the father of many nations, and therefore he changed his name from Abraham to Abraham, as we see in verse 5. No longer will you be called Abram, your name will be Abraham, for I have made you the father of many nations. The covenant was with Abraham, was not just for Abraham only, but also for all the nations of the world, as we've seen. Sarai means contentious, as some scholars suggest. And her name was changed to Sarah. And God changed her name to Sarah. And the meaning of her name was, Sarah is my princess or my lady. The sign of the covenant that God made with Abraham was circumcision of the flesh, as we see in verse 11. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and you. And that's the sign of the covenant. We've seen the sign of the covenant that God made with Noah about the flood, that he won't destroy the earth with the flood in that way again. And the sign was the rainbow. Now he makes a covenant with Abraham, and the sign is circumcision of the flesh. God required Abraham to keep the covenant by carrying out circumcision on all the males in his family. And this included Ishmael, the son of Hagar, the Egyptian woman. So it wasn't just Isaac and his descendants to have circumcision to observe the sign of the covenant, but Ishmael as well to observe the covenant. And that was Abraham's part in the covenant. Get all the males in your family circumcised. So anyone who refuses to do his part of the covenant will be excluded from the covenant. Let's look at verses 13 and 14. Whether born in your household or bought with your money, they must be circumcised. So if they get into Abraham's household, even if they are servants, they must be circumcised. Which means even servants would observe the covenant. It would have an implication for them as well. My covenant in your flesh is to be an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who has not been circumcised in the flesh will be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. Well, Ishmael was circumcised, right? He was never going to be cut off from these people. Only someone who refused to be circumcised, or his parents don't want to circumcise a child, they will be cut off. So all male children must be circumcised on the 8th day after birth. Only Abraham was circumcised at the age of 99, and Ishmael was the only one also to be circumcised at the age of 13. All other male children will be from 8 days old. We can see that in verses 24 and 25. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and his son Ishmael was 13. So let's take a look at chapters 18 and 19, the Lord's judgment on sin. This chapter starts with the Lord appearing to Abraham. Verse 1. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. I'm not sure why great trees of Mamre are brought into the picture, but maybe it gives you the allocation of geographically of the place. But also it could have been a very hot climate at that time there. So Abraham sat down under these trees in the heat of the day. So we do have some hot climates here in South Africa. Well, we need more trees, I think. Maybe get some trees of Mamres to start growing in this place. Verse 2. tells us that Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. That's quite interesting. When he saw them, he bowed low to the ground in worship. That's how he responded. What we are seeing more and more is that God is appearing in human form. Remember how Hagar saw the angel of the Lord in the desert. This chapter is describing a human male, which is why Hagar was not startled when she saw him in the desert. He just looked like a man. And from Hagar's encounter, we learn that the angel of the Lord is God. Could this be tied to the seed of the woman of Genesis 3:15? We are told that the seed of the woman is going to be a human child. But look at that phrase, seed of the woman. It's going to be a human child. We should know from this verse that there will be no one else to destroy the work of Satan. It will be only this one child. Nobody else. Only one according to what God's will was that will do that. And now that we are seeing God appear in human form, is to reveal more about the seed of the woman who will destroy the work of Satan. Keep ourselves in that period of time. It's the way these people would understand this. So these chapters 16 through to 18 are starting to reveal that the seed of the woman is God who is appearing in the flesh. However, this child is not yet born. The only understanding would be that the angel of the Lord is a pre-incarnate appearance of the seed of the woman. We could say that the angel of the Lord is a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ, and we would be correct. But the people living at that time didn't know Jesus Christ as we know him. We live after the cross. They lived before the cross. So how much would they know about Jesus Christ and his work? Very little. All they knew about was that promise of the seed of the woman. So we could say for them, this is what they could say. The angel of the Lord is a pre-incarnate appearance of the seed of the woman. So for them that would make sense. So they could safely say that this who the angel of the Lord would be, and if they could tie that up that way. So let's leave it right there for now and wait until the scriptures give us more information about the angel of the Lord, because we've got more information that's going to be coming up in these books as we read about the angel of the Lord. Abraham told Sarai to prepare some food to refresh the 3 visitors as he saw that they were on a journey with a mission. One of the 3 was the Lord talked with Abraham. Once again we see fellowship with God. Remember how God talked with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day in the Garden of Eden? The angel of the Lord talked with Abraham. And God says, shall I tell Abraham what I'm about to do? That's conversation. That's having fellowship. God is not there to give us what we want and leave us alone. We were created to have fellowship with God. Many think that, oh no, God is there. He's going to give me what I want. But that's not what God created us for. He created us to have fellowship with him. God told Abraham that Sarah was almost 90 at that time. She'll be 89. Will give birth in a year's time. 13 years earlier, Sarah gave up hope of having any children. That was at the age of 76. Now, almost 90 or 89, this was definitely impossible. And then God told them to wait for 1 more year. What was God doing to these people? Well, here's what God was doing to these people. He was building their faith in him. It's not what you can do, it's what I can do. Go back from the beginning and we see that all the way. Now God is teaching it to Abraham and his wife. God was clarifying the human limitations. His work was humanly impossible, but divinely possible. Genesis 18:14 says, is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Is there anything too hard for the Lord? See, that's the point that God is doing to get through to teaching to get through to Abraham and his wife and his family. Then the men got up to leave, but the Lord stayed to talk more with Abraham. The Lord decided to tell Abraham about something he is about to do. The Lord told him about his plan to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because of their sin. But then Abraham remembered, oh, wait a minute, my nephew lives there. So he indirectly pleads for his nephew's life. They had a really long conversation between the Lord and Abraham about this, and in the end, both God and Abraham were satisfied with the results. Verse 25, far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you, will not the judge of all the earth do right? Sodom and Gomorrah, of course, we read the story, was destroyed. And Lot and his daughters were saved because the Lord was merciful. Here's an attribute of God that we could look at. This attribute is quite concrete. It tells us in concrete terms. The Lord was merciful to them. So verse 16 says, when he hesitated, the men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and of his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city. For the Lord was gracious, or the Lord was merciful to them. We must understand that Lot was unaware that his uncle Abraham was pleading for his life. However, Lot's wife, she didn't make it because she was too attached to earthly possessions and found it hard to let go. Being attached to material wealth caused her to lose her life. She turned into a pillar of salt. However, Lot and his daughters left all their possessions and went to live in the mountains. Now Lot's daughters, having lost their future husbands, because their husbands didn't travel with them, they stayed in Sodom and Gomorrah. So they died with everyone there. And Lot's daughters thought that we will become extinct. So they made a strange plan to continue the family line. They got their father drunk and each had a child with their father. He, of course, was unaware, which is why they made him drunk. One child was named Moab, from whom the Moabites came. The other was named Ben-Ami, from whom the Ammonites came. So if you haven't heard of those names, as we go through these books, we will start finding out who the Moabites are and who the Ammonites are and how God related to these kind of people. So in conclusion, what can we say? God revealed himself to Abraham as creator, as sovereign, and then as the Lord Almighty. And he continued to reveal himself as merciful and gracious. He also revealed himself in human form as the angel of the Lord. So what Hagar would have seen in the desert would be the exact same look of Jesus when he walked with his disciples on the shores of Galilee. He wouldn't have looked any different. He's the pre-incarnate of Jesus Christ. But of course they didn't know that. They just knew him as the pre-incarnate appearance of the seed of the woman. So God revealed himself in human form as the angel of the Lord. All this revelation gives us a better understanding of the seed of the woman who will crush the head of the serpent. Let us bow our heads in prayer. Father, we are truly grateful that as we go through your word, even as many times as we can, we only can learn what your revelation to us in a deeper way gives us better understanding of what you are like and what you can do, what you have promised and how you will bring it to pass. We are truly grateful that even as we look forward to the chapters that are still to come in this book, that we will continue to grow in knowledge, grow deeper in understanding what you are like, and we could glorify you in a greater way. In Jesus' name.